This is Bob Friesen with EDL 850, Module 4, and I have selected as which topic to cover is harassment as it pertains to USD 102 Cimarron High School. And first of all, I'd like to outline a few things as far as requirements for schools when it comes to how to deal with harassment. First of all, from the federal government, of course, the case that the book highlighted was Davis versus Monroe. And of course, it related more to sexual discrimination, but I think as we see that the cases um, were mainly dealing with schools who weren't dealing with students who were harassing other students. And I think this has also um, gone over into other areas of harassment, not just sexual discrimination as well. And of course, it expanded it, and luckily, with the part that's underlined, I think was important as written by Sandra Day O'Connor at the time, and that is that it wasn't every incident that happens in schools where someone says something that is objectionable, but that it must be severe, pervasive, and of course objectively offensive, meaning there must be an intent to intimidate or to make someone feel uncomfortable. It must be ongoing, and of course, it must be offensive to that person based on either how they look or um, religion or something on that order as well. And I think that was an important part of the federal ruling as well. Of course, Kansas legislation has had to, of course, because of the federal, that the Kansas schools, like states all the way around, all 49 states at least, have anti-bullying, cyberbullying, and character development legislation. And of course, a lot of that also pertains to bullying within the schools and harassment as it relates to it. And also lately, since I believe 2008, also addresses the cyberbullying as well. Now, the policies at Cimarron, first of all, the bullying policy is given out at enrollment. So as parents come through, each one is given the policy, and I believe they even sign off that they've received it. And each building also has it upon request, both at the elementary building and then we also have a junior high school building. And as far as teachers, we're required to review and discuss bullying videos each school year. And we're also directed to notify administrators, guidance counselors, anyone that pertains, that anytime we observe bullying in the hallways, but also obviously within our classrooms, but also outside the school day, whether it's travel on the bus or in a locker room during coaching or on the floor, whether it be on the football field or anywhere else, we're supposed to report that as well. And I would probably also say that an email or a report done in paper as well. So there's a paper trail to follow that the teacher is covered as far as it's been reported. And also, of course, with sexual harassment, there's a part in our student handbook as well as our faculty handbook that talks about sexual harassment and making sure that obviously we don't harass, but also permit the harassment of all the different categories you can see on there as well. And that means also on school premises or at school sponsored events. And of course, school sponsored events take in a large portion of the day as well. And as far as the harassment policies and student conduct book, obviously a lot of it is just to maintain a safe environment. And of course, underneath the part about behaviors are not allowed that are intended to cause another individual physical or mental harm, and the mental harm is obviously where the harassment probably usually comes in. There's a long list of possible violations that go along with that as well. And again, students are also required to attend a bullying workshop. And a guidance counselor also addresses bullying with our 7th graders, and 7th graders, of course, are new to our building, being a 712 building. And so the guidance counselor spends some time going over a lot of that information with them when they come at the beginning of each school year. Now, each student is also required, because they do use technology throughout the day, to sign, as well as a parent to sign, our technology acceptable use policy. And this also includes some things on cyberbullying. And of course, in today's world, that can mean even things being sent on emails and changes on Facebook and those types of things as well. Now, a couple things on areas of concern. I think obviously making sure students are understanding what we mean by harassment or bullying. And I think it really goes back all the way to the federal government's description of harassment, meaning that it's severe, pervasive, and objectionably offensive. And I think students need to understand that as well, that this is not a one-time thing, but this is something that is done over a course of time, obviously used to intimidate or to make someone feel very uncomfortable, and done for a very specific purpose, and also possibly because of how someone looks, because how someone acts, maybe because of a disability, those types of things. And that students also understand that this includes cyberbullying, whether that be done here at school or outside of school, if it impacts the school day. And I think that's one thing the book brought out in several cases, whether it be protests at school or anything else, but if it is going to disrupt a normal school day, even things that are done off of school grounds can still be an area of concern, I think, especially when it comes to the cyber world. The good news is, and this is not done by any formal survey, but I think in personal observation, I know that shortly after the federal case came out, it really brought to light the sexual harassment, whether it be from students to teachers or students to students. And it seems to me that it made students very aware of what they say, even things like innuendos and those types of things. And students were much more aware of what was going on around and what they said, and in some cases even made fun of, or maybe probably even made sure that they reported things that weren't necessarily sexual discrimination, but maybe is somewhat sensitive to that for a while. And I think teachers also more aware of sexual innuendos or making sure what they talk to students about. And at least in my personal and through probably about the 3 schools I've taught in since that time, that's good news that it has brought that to light. The bad news is, of course, with cell phones and computers, even a change in Facebook status can set some students off, and of course that depends on how much those are used in school, but even outside of school. And I think that's one area where harassment has gotten to, and one area that obviously it impacts the school day. For instance, we allow our students to use their phones before and basically up to 10 minutes before school starts, and then at the last school bell they can turn their phones back on, and then also at the high school lunch periods. And I think that's one area where we really have to watch, and so many schools are trying to consider how much to allow their students to use cell phones. But even things like Facebook, yeah, we have filters, but cell phones get online by going directly to the tower and not through our filter. And so that brings a whole nother link in when it comes to harassment and things. And we can't control all the pictures and things that are coming through, especially pictures and videos, because it wants to actually know the video itself. And it usually is looking for text and not visual. And so that makes it more difficult as well. And of course, school shootings. We just had Newtown not long ago, other school shootings. And of course, that is also linked back to a lot of the harassment and things. So obviously, there's some issues we need to look at. But I think some of it leads back to maybe hypersensitivity to comments or incidents. In other words, for a while, we allowed too much, even hazing and those kinds of things. And I think when sexual discrimination came up in the late 90s, of course, a lot of things got reported that weren't necessarily discrimination. But it took students and even teachers a while to understand what was acceptable and what wasn't, and what was maybe not serious enough to deal with. And I think the same thing is going to happen a little bit with harassment and bullying and those kinds of things. We've taken that pendulum from one area where we really didn't do much at all. Now it's swung all the way over, and students are very sensitive about what's being talked about. And I think, again, it comes back to educating students and understanding what constitutes harassment and what doesn't. Now, you might wonder, well, if Cimarron, I looked at a lot of different categories throughout Chapter 4 of what to cover. And why did I pick harassment? I think it's a situation and incidents that maybe happened within our school building, but it was interesting because I asked my daughter to pick which one I should cover. And she's actually in our school building right now as a sophomore, and she said, well, there's a lot of going on with harassment, whether it be comments between classes or before school and after school. And which was interesting because as a teacher, and I'm out in the hallways a lot, and I don't see a lot of those types of things going on, but you realize there's a lot of little things, whether it be within groups within a classroom, cooperative learning, maybe it's in the library, and even incidents I've heard after our basketball season got over of some of the seventh graders feeling like they were intimidated and things by the eighth graders. And you don't hear about that, of course, until it's over. I didn't really see any personality changes or mood swings or attitudes or those kinds of things within the season. But I think that's something you always have to watch for. And I appreciated what was talked about also by the courts is that is in loco parentis, and meaning we are basically in charge of these students, and just as their parent would be. And of course, if parents were actually in our school building, would they handle things the same way? Probably not. But I think that doesn't give us an excuse in the school. I think that is one thing we need to be aware of, that we want to teach each of our kids, each of our students, just as if they were our own children. And again, we can't handle every situation. I think maybe there needs to be some training on that as well, as for students to handle what's being said to them and understand a little bit more about what's harassment and what's not. But I think that's something that, even the school shootings and those types of things, obviously, we just need to be more aware of what's going on in our building, and making sure we do what we can. This is Bob Friesen, EDL 850, Module 4.